Welcome to this seminar on the Aalto Data Hub and working with restricted datasets. Today, me and my colleague Pinia, will be talking about restricted datasets, what they are, what is it all about, and the role of Aalto Data Hub in facilitating research with restricted datasets. So let's begin. Before we go into the crux of the talk, let me give you a short background on what it is all about. So it is part of our endeavor or effort on research with open science, also opening up data and whatever we possibly can of our research products for the community as a whole. And this has been part of a larger effort from the European Commission, European Research Council in general. So what it says here is it requires the beneficiaries of research, basically the institutes that it funds, the universities that it funds, or the individuals that are funded for research, to make the data as open as possible, but as closed as necessary. So this is what is all about, use open science policy. And as a part of it, we are going to learn about the kind of data that we call restricted, and how to work with that when things cannot be actually shared. So this is the agenda of the talk. So precisely, I'll introduce what is restricted data. So here, the distinction is between personal data and non-personal restricted data. So we should understand that there are some limitations or restrictions which is kind of related to the data, which kind of prevents us from sharing all the data with the community. But there are certain ways with which we can help the community still to kind of understand our research and open up more about the nitty-gritties of the research, so that the kind of ideas can be taken forward for the community as a whole, and the research group and other individuals or our colleagues in general. So I'll provide a small introduction on that. Then I'll show you how to do open science with restricted data. I'll give you some case studies, and I'll kind of mention some good practices. And at the end, I'll talk about also availability statements that are there, which you can put into your paper whenever you kind of see that there's a limitation, and although there is a journal requirement that you share the data, but you cannot do it. So this will be the main part of the talk, where I give an introduction to non-personal restricted data and how to deal with it. And in the next part of the talk, Pinia will be talking about the Aalto University Data Hub and its role in allowing or facilitating research on with restricted data. So what are the problems with data sharing in general? So whoever is doing research with data in general kind of faces problems or limitations when they try to open up that research data. And there are multiple reasons for which people are kind of not being able to share that data or open up their data sets. Some of these concerns are ethical, and some of these are legal. So there are certain data protection laws, and there are security concerns. There are intellectual property rights and concerns of confidentiality, and also commercial interest. And so we understand like all these are individually very important points which need to be taken care about when we actually want to share our data with the community. And we understand that data in the hands of the wrongly dealt with can cause many different concerns. For example, it can emotionally harm individuals, stigmatize groups, and there could be misinterpretations, and that can kind of create some misunderstandings inside the community. So many things can happen when we are dealing with data and talking about sharing data. So all these things come to our mind, and we have to be very careful regarding those. So these are like more of community restrictions, but also from the perspective of the individual researcher, there are concerns. So as students or researchers or at any level, we are kind of we work under some kind of pressure, and we want to publish, we want to go as fast as possible with publications, send them to journals, and get our names printed, but get it, of course, after peer review and all that. but it kind of also we need to devote some time when we are talking about sharing data, and how actually we can do it if we are under that kind of pressure. And also there are other issues like to whom we actually hand over the data. So there is a matter of trust. There are some data journals now, but they are not really kind of, there are not a lot of them. So even if we publish the data, what we publish and whether they will actually get cited, so whether our effort will actually get kind of some kind of validation. And there are also sometimes absence of clear instructions like how to do it, and how one actually who is accountable for it, and all those things. So this is also the perspective that is there from the point of view of an individual researcher, and that needs to be taken care of also while one wants to share his or her own data. So now, what is restricted data here? So what we are talking about is data that is not sensitive per se, but there are certain kind of restrictions that come with it. And what are those kind of restrictions? So let's say there is kind of open data that is created by someone else, and the person is sharing it, but there are some licenses. And ones who are actually going to reuse it in their research, or are going to study it in general, or going to look into it, or going to transfer it to some other person, I mean, that need to take care of the licenses and understand them very carefully, like how the licenses have been documented or written, and then only one can go about and dealing with that kind of data. So that is generally a kind of a concern, or that one has to be careful about when one talks about like using open data. So there are these licenses. Now, if their data is actually purchased from a data intermediary, then also there are licenses, and this is basically because this is a commercial property of the data provider. And whenever there is a subscription for the data which the institute or the university has kind of purchased or subscribed to, then there are agreements and terms of use, and one needs to abide by those when they are kind of working with the data. And also that it is possible that with some kind of contract or agreement with some other organization, some confidential data has been shared, and there are some non-disclosure agreements which need to be taken care about. And so in that case, it's possible that one has to be extra careful regarding those. So these are the types of restrictions that come with data that is not strictly personal, is also kind of shared, and kind of people, researchers are working on it on a broad scale, but one has to be careful about. So what are the solutions? So already from the ERC guidelines, we can understand that there are some ways in which you can still facilitate reuse of that kind of data, or data related products, and that could be still beneficial for the community as a whole. So from the ERC guidelines, we see that it calls anything that are any kind of data related products, such as software, algorithms, codes, protocols, workflows, electronic notebooks. All these things are part of the open science paradigm, and all these are possibly could be shared and reused, and that would also facilitate or help the community in doing research or carry on research. So when we do open science with restricted data, what we exactly do, or what we have to keep in mind. So here we should remember this as closed as necessary as possible thing comes. So this is when you are not exactly sharing the data, or data, I mean Excel sheets or tables, or kind of anything that gives you the number that you crunch to get aggregate statistics. So then what you do, you can do, you provide detailed documentation on the data. You can open up your research outputs, share them, like your methodology in detail, the software, if you have built it, or what kind of software did you use when working with that data. And if in fact, what you could do is you can create some kind of synthetic data sets which has a similar statistical characteristics, And that could be used by people who are reading the papers and want to test the results or reuse the ideas, or interpret the ideas that you've already put into your research question and published it. So, and they are not able to do that because the data has not been shared. Then they could use that kind of synthetic data and use it in their models on a part of their research questions. And at the end, what we have the benefits of faster route to innovation and newer ideas, because whatever you do as a part of opening up your data related products or research outputs is going to help you in help your colleagues in general, the students who are new to research, or researchers who want to look into or reuse your innovations, and they won't have to reinvent the wheel per se, and they could work with your research products and move on creating newer ideas, and the productivity will be better. And also in terms of transparency, it helps a lot because it is important from the point of view of replicability and verifiability of the results. So whatever you publish or you convey with your research output, it becomes more validated and acceptable to the community as a whole, and there's a lot of trust that is created, and your papers will be cited, and then that there will be much easier access for the community to understand the results and interpret them. Now I come to some examples where this open data related research outputs have been used. For example, we can look at data libraries that are created. For example, this Ken French data library, where basically they are sharing some kind of broad statistical features of time series, financial time series. And this is like they're not exactly sharing the data, they're not exactly sharing the time series for many different reasons, because they can be proprietary data sets and they cannot be shared. But but whoever is going to use that data or has a subscription to that kind of data would use their models and work on them, and they don't have to refit the model, so that it makes life a lot easier. And then there is, for example, this software repository created for accounts and finance by Logran and McDonald, and you can use them for non-commercial purposes. So you can use their software, their codes and everything to work on the data, and then you don't have to recode and write newer codes or newer programs, and you don't have to spend time on that. Once you get access to the data, you can directly start working on that kind of time series or financial data. Then also we have repositories which were part of open air program from ERC, and these are in general for opening up data sets, but you can also any kind of research output or any kind of data related product can be shared. As an author, you can do that, and as a benefit, you also get a digital object identifier with which your data set or your data related product can be cited. And then also we have like this special kind of data sets, which an university or an institute actually has subscription to. So there are licenses, and the university purchases those access to those data sets. For example, at Aalto, we have the following databases like Zephyr, Orbis, Wharton Research Database, and Icon, DataStream, Morningstar. So most of them are related to data from companies and finance related and market related, and they provide you with time series and different kinds of news articles and different kind of analysis reports and everything. So all these have been prepared by analysts working on for those organizations or who are selling those data sets, and you need to buy from them, and you cannot openly share the data sets, but certainly you can you can share details about your models and about your codes and everything that is related to the data. So there are certain general terms of agreements which comes with that kind of data. So they are non-exclusive, non-transferable licenses only for academic use or teaching, and you cannot redistribute the data. So in general, when you come to dealing with doing open sites with restricted data, there are certain steps and necessary steps that one would follow. And these are like, first is the data management plan, which is kind of a requirement or a necessity for researcher or doctoral students. And what you do here is, like you mentioned, typically how the data is going to be stored, what kind of licenses are involved there, and who is going to be responsible for or accountable for the data, and if it needs destroying after the project is finished, who is going to do that. So you draw up a plan carefully, and either before you kind of apply for funding, you submit to the funder, or even after funding, you keep on updating the research data or data management plan and share it with your colleagues or the community or the group, or even when you are presenting your results to the funder, you share it with them. So it kind of is retained. This data management plan is retained and can be reused by your colleagues or your co-workers in the group. And then it's a very useful data-related product that you generate. And it's a kind of a requirement from the funder's point of view. Then whenever you are doing something with data that's precisely, for example, you're crunching numbers and you cannot share the data sets or the Excel sheets, then what you can do is, or what you could do is, you can share the metadata. So all research publications or all kind of journals allow you to share some kind of supporting information or supplementary information or extended data sets, where you could upload the metadata. So whosoever is going to work with that kind of data can use those kind of aggregate metadata, or and understand the data more, if not able to see what kind of exactly what kind of data you use. So generally, this kind of metadata involves aggregate statistics on, for example, if the data set is something related to the society, there could be some kind of aggregate statistics on gender, then group identities, or ages of people, or what kind of, or certain kind of behavior related to the individuals. And this kind of gives some kind of idea to people who are reading your journal article, and they could understand what kind of data you have been working with. So although the data cannot be kind of openly shared and cannot be seen, but still it could be kind of understood at a certain level if this metadata is shared. Metadata doesn't need to be just aggregate statistics. It could be, for example, those kind of variables that come out from your models, and when you generate a code or write a code working with those variables, and what kind of variables you have used in your studies. So for example, someone else who is going to work with that data and has equally has an access to that kind of data, could use your codes and know which of the variables you used and what kind of filtering you used for those variables. And so it will be easier for them to code themselves or implement those in their models. This, whenever you cannot share the data, you should always look for any kind of meaningful metadata that could be shared. So you could also mention reasons for why the data is restricted and cannot be shared. For example, why you are not able to open up the data. That could also be mentioned as a part of your metadata file. And also important is the licenses. So whenever you share any kind of data products, you could or you should use what kind of licenses you want to place with the data, so that people who are going to reuse the data or reuse the data related product would understand, like, what are the conditions that apply when they're using it in their own research. So with those kind of licenses, you transfer some kind of rights to the ones that are using it. So for here, some kind of license like Creative Commons is a very common one, and here creators of the data are credited for their work. And there can be also additions to the licenses, like for example, there is this essay which comes with the by essay, so Creative Commons by essay it becomes, and here it kind of mentions that adaptations must be shared under the same terms, or when you put an NC, it means only non-commercial uses of the work is allowed, or you put an ND, which means that no derivatives of the works are permitted. So there are many levels at which you can provide this kind of Creative Commons license or attach it to your data set and then open it up or your data related product. And at the end, the person who is going to look into the kind of documentation that comes with your data or data related product would understand that how exactly or how much care is needed when the data set or data related products is put to use. Here is an example of an attribution. So someone who is actually using a data set is not able to share it, but is using some kind of software. And the software was written by someone else. And then it's good that if the data is not shared, at least mention that what kind of software was used, because for example, this is here is an example of from a startup code or a startup package that was used for a two-stage least square regression. And if this is a state of the art of a kind of a model or a method, then the person or the people who are reading the paper may not able to understand in totality what you are doing in your research with the data set. But whenever they're going to go to this published article, which has come with the software or the package, they could understand more about what kind of models you have been running with your data, and what kind of variables were involved. So this is always a good practice to also kind of share or cite the packages that one has used during the kind of modeling exercise, or some kind of data fitting, or using some kind of analysis with the data. You can also open up your software. There are many ways to do that. So protocols, methods, and software codes could be shared and implemented with proprietary tools to guarantee the transparency and replicability of data collection. When the data could be purchased by anyone, then sharing the analysis code is equivalent to sharing of the data. So it's a lot helpful for the community as a whole. So you use the same or similar standardized variable names that are there in the original database. And so the person who actually uses your code directly has an understanding like what were the variables, or which of the kind of data features were used in the analysis. And any researcher can run the code and replicate your results, and it will be a lot more trustworthy if this is done. So you should choose a license when you open up your software, and then you can use repositories like GitHub and Zenodo to archive the software. And with Zenodo, for example, you could get a digital object identifier with which your software could be cited. Now I go into some case studies where I mention where you can and you could implement this, or how one could implement opening up data related products while working with restricted data sets. So this is an example of a subscribed database. It is Wharton Research database, and here what one has been doing is downloading some kind of stock related data. So this is a kind of subscription, for example, Aalto has, and we can use the data, download it, use it here on our Aalto machines, but we cannot redistribute. So whenever you use this kind of data, it is always a good practice that you mention the whatever licenses or restrictions that were used, that came with the data in your journal articles, so that people would know from where they could access this kind of data, and why exactly that could not be shared. And And typically, you also put a citation to the database, and you say here that Wharton Research Data Services (WRDS) was used, and when it was used, because the data sometimes also gets updates, and you mentioned the date and everything. So then the person who is going to read the paper or the article would know, like, more about the data, and the person has access to that database. They could log in and check what kind of data was used. And definitely you should use your metadata as well, which you provide as extended data with your article or supplementary information, where they could get fair enough idea that which were the variables that were used and what were the conditions that were applied in the when you modeled that kind of data set. This is another example of a data set which is not kind of a package of metadata which has been prepared by, for example, a professor of finance at Yale, Brian Kelly. And what he's doing here is actually use some kind of data that he had got from a subscription of Wharton Research Data Services, and it has been used in one of his papers, which has this title: "Is there Replication Crisis in Finance?" And he's not exactly sharing the data. What he's doing is he has some kind of models on asset pricing and things like those, and there are some things called factors which are very useful in under kind of these models, and he's sharing those factors, so the values of those factors as CSV files. So that pretty much so if you have access to the WRDS database, then you could utilize those factors and study the data using the same or similar models that has been used by Brian Kelly. And in addition to this kind of factors, he's also providing a link to his GitHub repository, where he has actually documented everything, his codes and everything, and metadata. And he has also shared his email, through which you could ask him personally, you could contact him and ask him about more details. So this is something that kind of enhances the visibility of the research that he or his team has been doing, and also creates a lot of transparency on what kind of research that has been done by his group. This is something that is also possible, that you use blogs. So there are many ways to do that. You could use the university infrastructure to or use your own web page, or use your departmental wiki to write blogs about stuff that you have been doing with data, and wherever you are using some kind of data set for which you have subscription. So you don't actually share, or you need to share the data, but you write details about how you process the data, pre-processed it, and what kind of codes that you used, and what are the nuances and everything. So for example, here I mention a blog that was written while using this database called Icon, which Aalto has access to, and Icon provides data sets with the help of APIs, and you can use Python codes to download different kinds of data from Icon. And here the blog actually mentions what kind of coding that is needed, or what kind of how to access the data actually, and how to process it after you in a Python code, within a Python code. So someone actually could reuse your code, and just if the person has access to the Icon database, and then he may not even be a great coder in Python. He could just use your code and reuse it and get access to the data, and even understand it with some kind of pre-processing, or some kind of aggregate statistics that you could put into your codes, and with the help of the codes you could understand what kind of data that is. Now I come to something on which Pinya is going to speak in more detail, and that relates to some kind of data set that comes with some legal contracts and NDAs. And Aalto has subscribed with the help of the Aalto Data Hub, which Pinya will describe in how exactly this is possible. And this is a data set called Telia Crowd Insights. And Telia is the kind of a mobile operator in Finland, and they're kind of sharing some kind of aggregate level statistics of mobility of individuals with their which with they could access from their smartphones, and they could post process and anonymize them so that it doesn't become personal data anymore or any kind of very sensitive information, but it is still kind of some kind of data that is proprietary and cannot be shared openly. So and certainly there needs to be a lot of care which comes with ethics and all that. So there are many different restrictions that come with the data. So Telia, you can buy directly this database from Telia, or you can get access to the database from Telia. But after you enter into some kind of agreement, legal agreement with them. But here with Aalto Data Hub, we have exactly done that, and we have a page there on our Aalto Data Hub website. And here we have documented everything and all the variables that are important or relevant, and how you could use the data, and what the data basically means, and to whom the data should be interesting. So this is a way of by which the data has been documented in detail in one of our in the data hub. And so this is some kind of documentation that we have done using the Aalto Data Hub. So you will understand it more when Pinya talks about it. I'll mention some good practices that you could work with while working with restricted data. So for example, if you're working with confidential company data, and there are some kind of still some kind of sensitive information that should not be disclosed. So and as a researcher, you might not want to handle, or might not want to be accountable for those kind of sensitive details. So you hire someone with the fund from your project, or you kind of employ someone who moves about between your organization and the company itself from where you are getting access to the data. And there should be some keys or unique identifiers which are codes and which could be associated to the data. And this person whom you hire would actually combine some kind of the original data set with the data set that you are working. And so you don't need to actually put your hands on the sensitive information. So actual identifiers are not never revealed, but what you could just work with those keys. And if you are working with some kind of transcripts or text data, for example, or for reports, you could share some kind. If that is, it is not possible for you to, or even if it's possible for you to share it, you could share some metadata, for example, word frequencies, linguistic features, sentiments. If you have done some kind of sentiment analysis, or if you cannot do share the actual text corpus, then you could share the time series, for example, that you can kind of use some kind of models on the text which you have used to convert text to some kind of numeric data. So you could use that kind of you could share that kind of metadata that has kind of constructed by you as a post processing of the text. Then you could also share pre-processing steps that you actually used when, for example, you match two data sets. So many a times in our research, we combine different data sets, and sometimes there are kind of names or identifiers and they don't exactly match. And then you have to do some kind of hard coding or manually do those kind of things. And you have to filter out a lot of noise. So how exactly one has done it is very important to document, so that another person who is going to work or do the same kind of thing, which is like matching two data sets or the same data sets, can reuse the kind of information. It will be a lot easier for that person to work with that data. And there are many other methods, like, for example, this is a method of generating precisely synthetic data, or data that kind of resembles the original data, but is not exactly the original data. So it is called statistical disclosure control, and with which you could do something called micro aggregation, noise addition, shuffling, generate synthetic data. So by this you could share some kind of statistics or some kind of features of the data, but you are not exactly sharing the original data set. And then also when you are doing dealing with some kind of sensitive information that still is there even after the data is non-personal, you should always do pseudo anonymization, and definitely that kind of helps. And for example, if you are using, say, let's say hospital record, then you could use some kind of computer that is located within the hospital premises, so that data need not be carried out of the hospital, and you do the anonymization steps inside the hospital premise itself. And then you might want to transfer the data using some secured logins. So in both ways, so you are not exactly transferring any kind of sensitive information outside the hospital, and you're also using kind of secure mode of communication between your university computer and the hospital computer. Now I'll mention some kind of availability statements, which you could use similar statements if you are working with restricted data sets, and if it has not been possible for you to share the data as a whole, or you are only able to share some kind of data related product but not the exact data. So this is the first one is a journal article by Yaskari, and they are working with medical information and medical images. And this was a collaboration between Aalto University and the Tampere Hospital and PlanMaker. And what they're doing, they're mentioning the following thing. So they're saying that the data sets used in model training, validation, and testing were provided by TAIUS, which is the Tampere Hospital, and as such is not publicly available, and restriction apply to their use according to the Finnish law and GDPR. So they are precisely mentioning that what is the restriction that prevented them from sharing the data. However, they are sharing the codes, and they mention that the codes used for pre-processing and deep learning includes proprietary parts and cannot be released publicly. So even some part of the code that could be shared, like for example, the pre-processing steps, where they mention, however, pre-processing and deep learning algorithms can be replicated using information in the method section. So they could disclose some kind of information with which the community as a whole could understand what kind of methods they use. They're not able to share the exact nature of the data or exact database or which they used, because simply because this is a sensitive information, this is medical data, and this comes under GDPR. This is some article which was on the Telia data itself, and again, because it's a subscription, and the data set cannot be that has some kind of you cannot just redistribute the data. There is a statement with the paper which says the data analyzed in this study is subject to the following licenses restrictions. The mobility data set, crowd insights, is commercial and propriety of property of Telia company. The other data sets used for population level information are publicly available and referenced in the manuscripts. Requests to access these data set should be directed to the website, and they mention the Telia business website. So the person reading the article knows that why the dataset could not be shared, and if they would like to work on a similar kind of data which is related to mobility, and the study was on mobility during COVID, they could get in touch with Telia company who is actually selling the data. And now at Aalto we are doing it through facilitating this with the help of Aalto Data Hub. Here is another example where the codes were shared, but the database could not be shared, again, because it was kind of a subscription. So it's a subscription from Icon, where they kind of provide transcripts of CEO of companies. So this group, what they have done is they have studied these transcriptions, and they have tried to analyze the behavior of CEOs. So they are sharing the codes, not exactly kind of in their extended data supplementary information, but they're declaring they're open to share, and they're mentioning we are willing to share the code we developed to calculate the big 5 personality traits of executives based on transcripts of their speech. Interested scholars should contact the lead author for the access to the code. So this is another popular way of with which you can declare that you are open to share something that is data related, if not the exact data set as a whole. So this is how more or less we work when we are talking of restricted data, the premise of restricted data, and we still want to help our community or our fellow researchers. So the best way or the way forward is to embed data sharing practices or into your research designs from the very beginning. So it minimizes your effort and time, and so you can quickly move towards publications and still in effect help your fellow colleagues. There are also certain rewards of being this kind of proactive, and you just don't have to comply, just don't have to tend to the bare necessities, but you kind of be proactive. So you can, with this kind of opening of your databases or documenting it, you become more visible to the community as a whole, and that kind of also increases the chances of citation of your articles, increases the trustworthiness of your research as a whole. And if in any case you are unsure about what to do and how to follow up with the database you are working, then it's always a good practice to consult the legal experts in the university or who are there to help your teams. So now I'm handing over to Pinia, who is going to talk about the Aalto Data Hub in detail, how this comes up as a solution while working with restricted data sets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kunal. So, hi, I'm Pinja Hirvinen. I will work as a coordinator at the Aalto University Data Hub, and I will present you this service in a bit more detail. So, what is Aalto University Data Hub? So, it is an official research infrastructure at Aalto, which is aiming to improve data acquisition, dissemination, and transparency within Aalto as well as Finland. So this service originated from this problem that was recognized, which was that costly, unique, and excellent data was being bought for a small amount of people within Aalto at a time, and this was actually done multiple times for the same data set or data source. So we created a solution. Now you can access as well as find information of data that has been acquired at Aalto through the Aalto University Data Hub. Our goal is to ease research as well as lower expenses by having only one license per these highly used and desired data sources for all of Aalto to use. So our main service is our website, which I will shortly show you some more details of. So the main services within this website are our catalog of data sources that can be used in research. So this includes both licensed or commercial data that has been acquired for Aalto, as well as some open source data that some researchers at Aalto use. We also have a list of research programs that use Statistics Finland remote database Fiona. So these research programs are led by university professors or researchers, and they allow a possibility to use Finnish registered data. The idea of this list is for you to know of collaboration opportunities which allow you to also access this kind of registered data. Then we also list information on accessing and storing data, as well as some links to other Aalto services, which will tell about these in more detail. So here you can see our website. So the link is datahub.aalto.fi, and this is the main page that you will see once you enter the web page. So from here, you can either use the main menu or this yellow box with a few links to find the data sources. So on the main menu, either data sources, or then here on the yellow box, find research data. These both lead to the same page. And same with the data-related research programs. So you can find it here on the main menu or here on the yellow box. Then on the main menu, you can also find the data tools and services that I mentioned, as well as some news articles that we have published. Then information about what the Data Hub does, as well as the contact information for us. So next, I thought I would show a few examples of data assets that we list at the Data Hub. So as I already mentioned, we have some commercial data, which means licensed datasets from databases and data providers. So for example, EBSCO, Morningstar, Nexus Uni, as well as many more this type of services that are licensed. Then we also have some proprietary data, which means data that is owned and provided by different organizations. So as Kunal already mentioned, this Telia Crowd Insights is one of these. Then we also have, for example, Claudia, as well as food retail price data from the K&S group stores. Then there's also some registry data, which means data that is available at some authorities' registries. So, for example, annual reports for US companies or some Statistics Finland data. Then we also list some repositories. So these are usually already open access, and they're meant to be reusable scientific data. Some examples of these are the Finnish Social Science Data Archive, Research.fi, and VTT's Research Information Portal. We are listing these because a lot of all the researchers are using these. So we think it's important to have this information there for example, new researchers or students. And in addition to this, we have many, many more data assets. So at the moment, we have over 50 different data sources in our catalog. Then what are some other use cases of the Data Hub? So we can help you manage processes for large data acquisition. You can contact us in case you have a data that you want to acquire, and we will help you the best we can. With us, you can also develop datasets to complement other datasets that are already existing, and these new datasets can also be listed with us. Obviously, we are also a platform for advertising data as well as research opportunities. So if you have data or some sort of opportunities that you think would be really important for other researchers at Aalto, we are definitely the ones to contact about this. You can also expedite applications for sensitive data using existing organizational knowledge with us, and a bit more information about this can also be found on our website. So then a bit about what we aim to be in the future. So we are a continuously developing initiative. We're very flexible, and our aim is to fill gaps that have been left by other more established university services. So this service was actually especially created to address gaps in data acquisition as well as maintenance. And we aim to be a university-wide initiative, or at least as close to that as we can be. And currently we're working closely with the schools of business, science, and engineering, as well as multiple departments within them. But we're continuously looking for other research groups and departments that we could work with and that have data that is interesting for other research groups at all. Then some services that we think we could also provide in the future, in addition to the ones that I have already mentioned. So we think we could provide data stewardship, so meaning data creation, provision, and dissemination. In addition to this, we could be of help with data acquisition and contracting support more than we already are. And we are actually looking into expanding this service at the moment. We also aim to be the center of excellence for research done with Statistics Finland registry data, which is what we are doing with the catalog of the research programs that use this Fiona database. We also think we could help with data development. So, for example, we could create pre-processed datasets from raw data. So often data that we get from services is in raw formats, which means that researchers need to process this first before they can use it in their research. We want to ease the research process by already creating these pre-processed datasets so that every researcher doesn't have to do the same steps again. So how can you contribute to our service? Here you can again see our main page, which I already showed you. So if you have acquired or know of data that could be interesting or of use to other researchers at Aalto, you can suggest these to be added to our catalog through our website. Now we'll show you how to do this. So on our main page, from the main menu, you can click Contact. And from there, when you scroll a bit, you will find this data suggestions box where you can give your contact information as well as some description of the data that you wish to list with us. We are actually developing this service at the moment, and we will make it more easy for you so that it won't require back and forth emailing between us and you. Thank you so much. You can contact us through the emails listed here, so either at datahub@aalto.fi or you can contact me directly at pinja.hirvinen@aalto.fi. Thank you.